Hey, listen up. Ethan works at a subcontractor factory for my company. You know, it's such a small factory that it'd go bankrupt in a flash if my company stopped doing business with them. They make small screws, springs, and stuff like that. Reunion after party venue. Bob shouted, using the spare microphone, not caring about his excited former classmates singing nostalgic songs that were popular back in high school at the second party venue of the reunion. I couldn't say anything back. Perhaps because he saw me like that, Bob got even more carried away. In contrast, as everyone knows, I'm the son of a big company's CEO. I'm working there as a salesman now. Well, I'm gonna be the CEO eventually. Saying that, Bob took the hand of Catherine Miller, the girl sitting next to him, the one I had feelings for. You'd prefer me over that poor guy, right, Catherine? I hung my head without thinking. I didn't want to see her reaction. Why did I even come to this reunion? I just really wanted to see Catherine. If I could meet my past self, I'd feel like yelling at him, "Don't go." However, this reunion was the trigger that greatly set our fates in motion. When I received the notice that a high school reunion was being held, I made up my mind to go. I discreetly asked the organizer and was told that Catherine Miller, the classmate I was interested in during high school, would also be coming. Catherine and I only had the elective art class together, and we weren't particularly close. We only talked once, but I liked her posture when she held a brush and painted. She would neatly tie her trimmed black hair at the back of her head, straighten her back, lower her cool eyes, and run the brush over the paper with a serious expression. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that I attended high school without skipping just to see her like that. I've grown up more than I was back then. Seeing me like this, she might re-evaluate me. If things go well, we may exchange contact information, go out to eat together, and deepen our relationship. But such dreams of mine were shattered miserably when I arrived at the reunion venue. The person in question herself wasn't there. After finishing the toast celebrating our reunion, a woman came over to me. It was Amanda, Catherine's friend. "You're Ethan, right? You've matured compared to high school that I couldn't tell. You used to give off this 'I'm a bad boy' vibe to the max." I laughed back at her, who said that while holding a cocktail. "Hey, Amanda, you were friends with Catherine, right? You still keep in touch?" "Of course, we're still friends. She said she's gonna be late today. Maybe she'll join for the after party." Amanda gave me a meaningful smile, so I looked away, feeling embarrassed. She's totally seen through that I have my eyes on Catherine. When the first party ended, those joining the after party decided to go to karaoke. It was raining outside. Unfortunately, I hadn't brought an umbrella. Those who forgot umbrellas like me were sharing with others who had them. About to be left behind without anyone calling out to me, I quickly gave up on getting wet and tried to leave the store. "Wanna come in?" The moment I thought I heard such a dignified voice, a pitch-black umbrella covered my head. Seeing the umbrella's owner, I was unwittingly dumbfounded. Trimmed black hair and cool eyes looking up at me. She had gained more luster than in high school, but that was undoubtedly Catherine. My heart started pounding loudly. "Catherine." "Yeah. Long time no see, Ethan." In contrast to me, who was getting tense and feeling heat in my face, Catherine seemed calm, as if letting me under her umbrella was no big deal. She started walking. I hurriedly matched my pace with hers so as not to leave the umbrella I was finally let under. The after party was held at a karaoke place. My former classmates were getting excited, singing songs that were popular during high school and saying, "So nostalgic." I wasn't in a position to feel such nostalgia, because Catherine, who had let me share half of her umbrella, sat right next to me. I was tense the whole time from the modest heat I felt beside me. I wondered where my earlier self, who had thought about getting along with her if things went well, had gone. Catherine, who had been glancing at me from time to time, spoke up as if she had made up her mind. That's when it happened. "Catherine, let's sing together." Suddenly, a bright but somehow creepily persistent voice was heard. And then, a man pushed his way roughly between us. It was Bob, our classmate. Catherine showed a troubled face. "I don't really know recent songs." "What's that? You know old songs? Then how about something like this?" Catherine looked at me with a troubled expression. "Cut it out, Bob." "Catherine's clearly not into it," I warned him. Bob then looked at me as if he was seeing something dirty. Oh my, Ethan. Can you really take that attitude with me? Wouldn't it be bad for a pool guy like you if you were forced to quit your current company? What do you mean, Bob? Catherine asked in a confused voice. Bob laughed and puffed out his chest. Then, he grabbed the spare microphone on the table and shouted, "Hey, listen up," not caring about the others singing. "Ethan works at a subcontractor factory for my company, you know. It's such a small factory that it'd go bankrupt in a flash if my company stopped doing business with them. They make small screws, springs, and stuff like that." I couldn't say anything back. Seeing me like that, Bob got even more carried away. In contrast, as everyone knows, I'm the son of a big company's CEO. I'm working there as a salesman now. Well, I'm gonna be the CEO eventually. Saying that, Bob took Catherine's hand. "You'd prefer me over that poor guy, right, Catherine?" I hung my head without thinking. I didn't want to see a reaction. "Come to think of it, Ethan, you stole Catherine's art tools in high school, didn't you? You're not so poor now that you gotta steal other people's things, right? I'd be in trouble if you stole my Rolex here." As he spoke, Bob showed off the gold watch on his left wrist. He was just saying that he'd be in trouble if it got stolen, but he really wanted to brag. Moreover, with what Bob just said, the people around us went, "Oh," as if they remembered, and started looking at me like I was a criminal. I let out a sigh without meaning to. In high school, I lived quite freely, ignoring those around me. To put it simply, I was a delinquent. The reason I was like that was because of my mother. I had an older brother. He was what you'd call a genius. He remembered everything he saw once, and he could immediately do anything he was taught, whether it was sports, music, or art. In contrast, I was average. I was an ordinary person who had to work hard just to be a little above average in both academics and sports. My mother doted on my genius brother. I was resigned to the fact that it couldn't be helped. Instead, my father and brother would praise me when I got good grades on tests or did well in phys ed, so I could still work hard at that time. However, when I was in 6th grade, my brother and father passed away. They got into an accident while I was riding in Dad's car with them. I was the only one who survived. My mother apparently couldn't accept that fact. Be like your brother. In the dimly lit viewing room where my brother and father were laid out, my mother cornered me with those words. All I could do was nod. Both of my parents had already passed away, and I had no other relatives to rely on, so my mother was the only family I had left. But since I was ordinary, I had to work hard to excel at studying, sports, and everything else like my brother. When my mother saw me making that effort, she would scream in a shrill voice, "Your brother never had to do that." So I had no choice but to do it behind her back. As expected, I couldn't keep up that lifestyle for long. I failed the high school entrance exam. I took the exam for the high school with the highest deviation value in the area, but I spectacularly failed. Your brother would have passed at the top. I knew you were nothing like him. My mother hysterically threw the obvious at me. After that, she started treating me as if I didn't exist. The stress of being ignored by my mother and the backlash from trying too hard to be like my brother made me go delinquent. I decided to become the opposite of my brother and attend a high school with a middling deviation value in the area, but I became the student with the worst grades and behavior there. I dyed my hair my favorite blue, pierced my ears, and always left my shirt buttons undone to show off the flashy colored shirt I wore underneath. I didn't care how many times the student guidance teacher warned me. If something pissed me off, I'd immediately get violent. I didn't take classes seriously and never did homework. Of course, I skipped practical subjects. Because of that, none of my classmates approached me. I found out Catherine was from a single-parent family one day after school about a month after enrolling. Many students had after-school activities, but of course, I chose not to attend in any. As I headed to my locker, there were 2 girls there. "Huh? Didn't the teacher ask you to clean the blackboard?" I told Catherine I had something to do and asked her to do it. Catherine's the girl who became class rep, right? You 2 close. We went to middle school together. That girl's been acting all goody 2-shoes since middle school. Maybe she's starved for a father figure since she's from a single-parent family. It's so obvious she's desperate to be liked by the male teachers. I got so disgusted that I kicked a nearby locker. The two girls were startled by the loud noise and turned pale when they saw me. Maybe she ain't acting like a goody two-shoes, but she ain't got no choice but to be one. The girls didn't say anything back to my words and quickly left the scene. Feeling even more irritated by that, I roughly tossed my books into the locker and left the school building. After that incident, I started keeping an eye on Catherine. It was because I was curious about her also being from a single-parent family. But it didn't take long for me to fall for how she earnestly moved her brush in the elective art class. A few months after I stopped skipping electives just to watch Catherine. Catherine, who went to her locker to get her art tools, let out a puzzled voice. Her friend, who had the same art class as Catherine, tilted her head and asked, "What's wrong?" "My art tools are gone." Did you put them somewhere else?" "No, I'm sure I put them here." I was also at the lockers to get my art tools, so I overheard that conversation. I quietly slipped away from there and returned to the classroom. Electives required moving to a different classroom, but there were still a few students left. I went into the room, looking around. Those remaining students saw me, then fled the classroom as if escaping. Ignoring the school bell, I kept searching for her art tools. Catherine's art tools were in a certain student's desk. I took them out and headed to the art room. The teacher only glanced at me when I came in late and didn't say anything. I knew the teachers thought there was no point in warning me, so I ignored them and went over to Catherine. Catherine had borrowed tools from the art room. When I stood next to her, she looked up at me with wide eyes. "Here." I handed her art tools to her as if pushing them onto her. She was stunned. She seemed surprised when she realized what had been pushed onto her were her own art tools. "These are mine." "Ethan, why?" "Those are the ones you were looking for, right, Catherine?" "Don't tell me you stole them, Ethan." Bob, who had also chosen art, interrupted Catherine's puzzled words. When I glared at him angrily, Bob shrugged and said, "Scary." "Well, Ethan's from a single-parent family, and poor people tend to have sticky fingers." Bob's muttered words seemed to reach the ears of the other students, and the eyes around me turned into those looking at a criminal. Unable to stand it, I clicked my tongue and left the classroom. I felt like I heard Catherine let out a wait, but I ignored it. As I was lost in memories of the past, Catherine's voice saying, "Everyone, listen," brought me back to the present. Catherine was standing there with a microphone in her hand and a brave expression. "Ethan didn't steal my art tools. He just found out they were missing and looked for them for me. Right, Amanda?" Saying that, Catherine looked at Amanda, who was diagonally in front of her. She nodded vigorously. On the day Catherine's art tools went missing, I saw Ethan come back to the classroom before electives and search around for something. I was scared of Ethan at the time, so I left the classroom right away, but you were looking for Catherine's art tools, weren't you? I hesitated over whether I should nod or not, but with Amanda's statement, the atmosphere completely changed to one that reevaluated me. The one who frantically tried to ruin that was Bob. No, he just pretended to search and returned what he stole himself, right? Enough already, Bob. In the first place, it's your fault that it turned into an atmosphere where Ethan was the thief. You suddenly started saying Ethan was from a single-parent family and poor. It was wrong of us to look at him with prejudiced eyes after hearing that, though. When a guy who also chose art said that, everyone nodded. Then they looked at me and apologized, saying, "Sorry, Ethan, and it might be too late, but..." Catherine walked up to me, avoiding the dumbfounded Bob. Then she looked me in the eyes. "I'm sorry. I had wanted to apologize for a long time. I knew you didn't steal them, but I couldn't correct it." Her words made my chest tighten. I was happy that Catherine had believed from the start that I hadn't stolen them. At the same time, the feelings I had for her in high school began to resurface. If I want to get closer to her, now's the time. "Hey, Catherine, if you don't mind, could we exchange Bob interrupted me there too. "Huh? What? You're gonna exchange contact info with Catherine? Just 'cause she was a little nice to you? Don't get carried away, you poor bastard. Catherine's gonna marry me. Right, Catherine?" The people around us started murmuring, and Amanda let out a surprised voice. "Is that true, Catherine?" Catherine silently hung her head. I felt like I had been punched in the head. "Hey Ethan, you might have been aiming for Catherine, but there ain't no way a poor guy like you can marry her." Bob's loud laughter echoed painfully in my head. My memories after that were terribly hazy. I don't remember how I got back to my apartment. I woke up to the bright morning sun and the sound of my alarm clock, and found a large number of beer cans scattered around me. When I sat up, my head was pounding terribly. It was clear that I had gotten drunk out of despair after being shocked by the fact that Catherine was marrying Bob. Holding my throbbing head, I headed to work. But I shouldn't have tried to work in that state. I slipped and dropped a box full of screws on my foot. I was immediately taken to the hospital. I was diagnosed with a fractured instep and admitted to the hospital. The factory manager, who rushed to the hospital, let out a big sigh when he heard about it. When I instinctively tensed up, the factory manager said, "Sorry. I didn't mean to be exasperated with you, so don't worry." I naturally felt relieved at those words. It's rare for you to have an accident like this. Did something happen? I heard you were going to your high school reunion yesterday. While waiting for the hospital room to be prepared, the factory manager asked me that, and all I could do was hang my head. I couldn't say I got drunk out of despair after being rejected by the girl I liked. Speaking of high school, that was when your hair was blue. You really surprised me back then. The factory manager looked at me with concern, but also with a hint of nostalgia. I first met the factory manager when I was still in high school. That day, I went to school, but left before noon just because I felt bored for some reason. I didn't want to go home either, so I was wandering around aimlessly when it suddenly started raining. I went into a convenience store and reached out to buy a plastic umbrella. The one who reached for the umbrella at the same time was the factory manager. The factory manager pulled back his hand in surprise and said, "Go ahead," giving me the umbrella. There was only one umbrella left. I looked at the factory manager. He was wearing a suit at the time. His suit was wet from the sudden rain, but the bag he was carrying wasn't wet. He was holding it carefully so it wouldn't get wet. "I don't need it. You use it, old man." Saying that, I dashed out of the convenience store. I heard the factory manager calling out, "Hey, wait." But I ran away as if escaping. And the next day, I caught a cold. But I had an art class that day, so I forced myself to go to school despite feeling feverish. Art was fourth period, so when it ended, I left school feeling dizzy. On the way home, I ran into the factory manager again, who was wearing work clothes. When he saw me looking unwell, his eyes widened and he gave me a ride home. Not only that, but when he saw that no one was home, he took care of me. "I'm gonna borrow your kitchen," he said, and brought me some warm soup. I didn't touch the steaming soup for a while. "Why are you taking care of a total stranger like me?" I said that as if pushing him away, but the factory manager didn't seem to mind. "You really helped me out by giving me the umbrella yesterday. I was on my way to an important business meeting that the fate of the factory depended on. That's why I wanted to thank you and was looking for you. I'm glad I found you right away because of your blue hair." The factory manager laughed lightly as he said that. Somehow feeling reassured by his smile, I brought the soup to my mouth. It was delicious. I remembered it had been a long time since I had eaten a meal made by someone else, and I shed a tear. "Are you okay?" When the factory manager asked with concern, I told him about myself. When I was in elementary school, my father and brother passed away, and my mother told me to be like my brother. My brother was a genius, so my mother loved him more than someone like me. For my mother's sake, I tried hard to be like my brother, but it was impossible. No matter how hard I'd tried, my mother wouldn't acknowledge me. I tried my best, but I couldn't become my brother. I must have been weakened by the fever to tell such things to someone I just met. And I had always wanted someone to listen, to understand how painful it was for me. The factory manager listened to my story earnestly. Then he gently patted my head when I finished talking and said, "You did well." I remembered my father and brother praising me the same way, and I cried again. Since then, the factory manager would sometimes come to check on me. When I found out he was coming all the way from the next town and asked if it was okay for him to be away from the factory, he laughed and said, "My employees are all reliable, so it's not a problem if I'm gone for an hour or two." I felt he was a good factory manager who trusted his employees. The factory manager would scold me if I didn't go to school and looked worried if I got into a fight with someone. He praised me for gradually starting to study after meeting him. When it was time to decide on my career path, I told him I wanted to work under him. "Are you sure?" "Of course, I'd be happy to have you join us. as you're kind and hardworking, but I think of you as my real son. You've already worked hard enough. From now on, I want you to live the life you want, the life that suits you." I felt my chest getting warm and wanted to work with him even more. I pleaded, and the factory manager said, "All right. However, there's one condition. You should live in an apartment near the factory. You should get away from your mother." I immediately accepted that condition. I told my mother I was going to work instead of going to college and that I would be living in an apartment, but she showed no reaction. Hospital life was boring. The factory manager lent me books to help with that. Read something like this once in a while. What he handed me, saying that, was a novel. It was a short story collection, so even I, who don't usually read books, could manage to read through it. The story I'm reading now is about a middle school boy who meets a mysterious girl in a park on a rainy day on his way back from an art class. That girl only appears in the park on rainy days. Reading that story with an atmosphere like cold rain, I suddenly felt like breathing in the cheerful air outside. I put the book on my lap and moved my wheelchair to go out to the garden. There was a small step, which caused me to drop the book. I bent my waist to pick it up, but a smooth-looking hand picked up the book faster. I recognized that hand, so I looked up in surprise. It was Catherine. I was so caught off guard by her being at the hospital and in a place far from our hometown that I stared at her in a daze. What a coincidence. Catherine returned the book to me, saying that, and I nodded without being able to say anything. She was wearing hospital-issued pajamas. "She must be admitted here. Did you fracture your foot?" "Yeah. I messed up at work." I was about to ask, "What about you, Catherine?" But I refrained because I felt somehow hesitant. "Can we talk for a bit?" When Catherine asked, tilting her head slightly, I nodded. Catherine pushed my wheelchair and stopped it next to a bench in the garden. Then Catherine slowly sat down on that bench. "I'm sorry about what happened at the reunion." "No, it's not something you need to apologize for, right? You didn't do anything wrong." When I said that, Catherine showed a somewhat relieved expression. Then, she repeatedly opened and closed her mouth as if she wanted to say something. When I tilted my head, she took out her smartphone from her pocket with a determined look. "Hey, you were about to ask to exchange contact info with me at that time, right? Is that offer still valid?" When she asked, looking up at me, my heart started dancing. "Of course," I answered, quickly taking out my smartphone. Seeing the name Catherine Miller entered in my contacts, I couldn't help but smile. "Ethan, how long are you gonna be in the hospital?" "I'm scheduled for 2 weeks. I'm here for a week. I was admitted 2 days ago, so 4 more days, I guess." 4 days. "Hey, while we're in the hospital, wanna chat like this? I've got nothing to do." "Yeah, of course." I was bored too. And so, for the remaining 4 days, I spent a few hours with Catherine after lunch. I was worried if I could keep the conversation going with her, but that was just an idle concern. We kept coming up with things we wanted to talk about. A particularly common topic was the struggles unique to single-parent households. "Your mom has to go to work, right?" I tried my best to be a good girl so I wouldn't worry my mom any more than necessary when she was tired from work. "You were always serious, Catherine." I went off the rails instead. "Even that must have been for a reason, Ethan." Catherine looked up at me, but I had no intention of telling her about my mother. I didn't know why Catherine was hospitalized, but I didn't want to weigh down her heart further. Perhaps sensing that I wasn't going to talk, Catherine continued. "My mom passed away last year. I don't have any other relatives, so I'm all alone." "That's rough. Are you living around here now?" "Yeah. A lot happened, and I quit my job too. I came here recently." Catherine didn't seem to intend to talk about the "a lot" part. I'm being vague about my mother's story too, so I figure we're even. 4 days later, as scheduled, I was set to be discharged from the hospital. Catherine saw me off to the hospital entrance. "I'm glad you were able to be discharged without any issues." Saying that, Catherine showed a smile, but it seemed forced, with a hint of sadness. So I looked straight at Catherine and said, "I'm gonna come visit you every day until you're discharged." Then Catherine's eyes widened in surprise. She then put her hand to her mouth and laughed. "Okay, I'll be waiting. But don't push yourself, all right?" "No problem." As I left the hospital after responding cheerfully, Catherine waved at me with a big smile this time. A few days later, Catherine, who I visited the hospital every day, told me she was set to be discharged the day after tomorrow. I was thrilled at the good news. That's great, Catherine. I'll take a personal day and help carry your stuff on that day. I don't have that much stuff, so it's okay. But if you insist, want to celebrate afterward. Celebrate. Yeah, to celebrate our discharge, both yours and mine. Sounds good. I'm in. As we were talking happily like that, a dark shadow fell between us. It was Bob. I've been looking for you, Catherine. I can't believe you're in the hospital here of all places. Catherine's face, which had been bright until a moment ago, instantly clouded over. Bob, why are you? More importantly, Ethan, why the heck are you with Catherine? You're in the way. Go home. Go home. Suddenly remembering the story about Catherine marrying Bob, I felt depressed. I had been trying not to think about it until now. With my mouth shut, I tried to leave the hospital room, but Catherine tugged on the hem of my clothes. Don't go. There were faint tears welling up in Catherine's eyes. I sensed there was some reason behind it. Bob, can I talk to you for a sec? I grabbed Bob's arm and forcibly dragged him out into the hallway. What the hell? That hurts. What if it breaks? You're too broke to pay compensation, aren't you? This is a hospital. Keep it down. More importantly, what do you mean you were looking for Catherine? If you're her fiancé, you should have gotten a call that she was admitted here, right? Bob said nothing and just gritted his back teeth. I frowned at his attitude. Hey, don't tell me. The thing about you marrying Catherine is a lie, isn't it? It ain't a lie. Catherine's mom passed away too, so she's all alone. If she marries me, her future's secure, right? I'm saying I'll marry her for her sake. I got pissed at his condescending tone. You say it's for Catherine's sake, but have you ever checked how she feels about it? Course Catherine wants to marry me. She's never turned down my invitations before. I started to doubt that. When I heard at the reunion that Bob and Catherine were getting married, I took it at face value. But after seeing her with tears in her eyes, holding me back just now, it didn't seem at all like she wanted to marry Bob. Bob didn't seem to have any intention of leaving. Having no choice, I decided to play my trump card. Go home. Otherwise, I'll tell Catherine that her art tools were found in your desk. Then Bob's face turned pale, and he gasped. Seeing Bob like that, I figured it was a good opportunity to ask something I had always wondered about. Why do you steal Catherine's art tools? To harass her. Bob shook his head and glared at me. If you hadn't found them, I would have been the one to find her art tools for her. Then I could have gotten in her good graces. I was appalled. This guy, both now and in the past, has only been trying to get in Catherine's good graces to win her over. I clenched my fist, determined not to let a guy like this near her again. If you go home right now, I won't tell Catherine about the art tools. When I glared at him, putting as much bass in my voice as possible, Bob let out a small scream, eek, while breaking out in a cold sweat. Then he left as if running away. After seeing Bob's back off, I returned to Catherine. Where's Bob? He went home. When I told her that, Catherine visibly breathed a sigh of relief. Bob and I kept in touch occasionally, even after graduating high school. Well, he kept contacting me on his own. My mom was happy that I was close with Bob, who's rich, so I couldn't just ignore him. When my mom got sick, I was invited to join his company because they had a flex time system, so I ended up taking the job. I was grateful for that, but after my mom passed away, he started pressuring me to marry him, saying he'd take care of me. Catherine gripped her blanket tightly. Tears she had been holding back started to stain the blanket. You see, my mom told me when she was still alive that I should marry Bob, so I thought maybe I should do as she said. I wanted to grant my mom's wish, and I owed Bob for putting in a good word for me at the company. But I hated it, yet I couldn't bring myself to say it, and worrying about it all the time led to me being diagnosed with a stomach ulcer. So that's why you're in the hospital. Catherine nodded slightly. I thought it was the perfect opportunity, so I quit my job and asked the doctor to specifically refer me to this hospital. Around that time, there was the reunion. I wasn't planning to go originally, because Bob might be there, but when I heard you were coming, that's why I decided to attend. On the day of, I ended up hesitating after all and skipped the first party. Catherine looked up at me. My heart raced at her serious gaze. I wanted to apologize to you for what happened back then. That was part of it. But also because I liked you, Ethan. That's why I wanted to see you. At the word like, my body temperature suddenly rose. But we never really talked, did we? Except that time I returned your art tools. When I said that, faltering, Catherine smiled slightly. It was about a month after enrollment, I think. Like I said before, I thought I had to be a good girl, so I couldn't refuse when classmates asked me for favors. That day too, I was asked to clean the blackboard because they had something to do, so I reluctantly did, and after, I went towards my locker. Then I heard the girl who asked me to clean the blackboard bad-mouthing me. I couldn't help but stand there frozen. It was a huge shock. Catherine shifted her gaze out the window as if reminiscing. Then there was a loud noise. When I came to my senses, you were kicking the locker, Ethan. And you said, maybe she ain't putting on an act, but ain't got no choice but to be a goody two-shoes. As Catherine gently touched her own chest, I could feel heat gathering in my cheeks like there was no tomorrow. At that time, I said such a pompous thing even though I knew nothing about you, Catherine. Just because we were both from single-parent families, I ended up thinking of you as if you were me. Catherine slowly shook her head at me as I made excuses. Those words really hit me hard. That's why I still remember them word for word. I was happy that you were looking straight at me, Ethan. I felt saved. And yet, I couldn't defend you when you were treated like a thief. I couldn't apologize to you or thank you. I couldn't do anything. Even though I had 4 whole years. Tears fell from her eyes. I wanted to stop them. With that thought, I embraced Catherine. You don't have to be so hard on yourself. I was able to go to high school for those 4 years because you were there, Catherine. When I watched you earnestly moving your brush during art class, I forgot about all the bad things. During that time, I was content just admiring your beauty. I could feel the heat rising in Catherine's cheeks up close. I like you. I've always liked you too, Catherine. When I told her that, Catherine happily buried her face in my chest. Then she put her hands around my back and hugged me tightly in return. I asked the receptionist to not let Bob visit Catherine even if he came. When I said he was stalking her, the receptionist immediately agreed. After that, I went back to her again. When I told her I made it so Bob couldn't visit anymore, she said, "Thank you," as if relieved. I gathered my courage and said to her, "Hey, Catherine, can you listen to me? About me and my mom." She nodded right away. Bit by bit, I told Catherine about how my genius brother died in an accident with my dad, how my mom forced me to be like my brother, and how that made me go delinquent. Catherine listened to my story with a serious expression. When I finished talking, she gently wrapped my hand in both of hers. "It's because you went through all that you could look straight at me, right?" Catherine said that with a smile. I felt like Catherine was kindly embracing my past self, who had desperately tried to live up to my mother's expectations, and this time, I was the one who cried. The next day, I told the factory manager I had something to talk to him about and asked for his time. "My former classmate is looking for a job. Could you hire her here? She's a really serious girl who served as class rep for all 4 years in high school." When I asked this, the factory manager crossed his arms as if thinking, "Is she the girl you like?" Being asked that out of the blue, I thought my face would catch fire. Seeing me like that, the factory manager showed an amused smile. "Well, putting that aside, if you're recommending her, she must be a good person. Could you tell her to bring her resume and work history and come for an interview? Thank you so much." I thanked the factory manager, feeling like I could jump for joy. And so, a week after being discharged, Catherine started working as a clerk at the factory where I work. About a month after Catherine joined a company, the factory manager told me to come with him to meet a client, and it turned out to be the company where Bob's father is the CEO. And the person we were meeting with was Bob. As soon as Bob saw me, he scowled. "Manager, why'd you bring this guy along?" "For his future learning. More importantly, you know each other. We went to high school together. You know, this guy was a total delinquent back then. He dyed his hair blue, got piercings, skipped classes all the time, and had the worst grades. I think you'd be better off firing a guy like this." He sank into the reception room sofa as if relaxing. Bob laughed, giving me a mocking look. The factory manager responded to Bob with an "I see. As you say, I'm thinking of cutting ties with our business with your company. The reception room fell so silent you could hear a pin drop. Bob let out a dumbfounded huh, which echoed loudly in the room. I had been thinking of ending our relationship for a while now. I had a debt of gratitude to the previous head, so I had been supplying products to you at an extraordinary price, but to be frank, it was in the red. What? Wait a sec. Without doing business with us, your company would go bankrupt, not just be in the red. You sure you want to cut ties here? Not a problem. Our business with you is in the red, but overall, we're in the black. If we stop doing business with your company, it'll actually reduce our losses, which is more than I could ask for. What about your debt of gratitude to the previous head? You gonna return kindness with enmity? I think we've repaid it more than enough. The factory manager, who calmly replied to the furious Bob, stood up and said to me, well, let's go home. As the factory manager quickly left the room, I hurried to follow him. When I looked back, Bob was standing there dumbfounded. Manager, are you sure it's okay? Like he said, they were a big client of ours, right? Like I said earlier, overall, we're in the black. Thanks to you. When I tilted my head, wondering what he meant, the factory manager looked at me with a softer expression. The client that brings in enough profit to make up for this company's losses is the one I had a business meeting with on the day I first met you. The bag I had with me that day contained important products and documents for the meeting. Thanks to you giving me the umbrella that time, I was able to keep them dry, and the deal went through without a hitch. So it's thanks to you. I have no choice but to cut ties with a company that has employees who would treat you with disdain. I was so stunned by the fact I learned for the first time that I couldn't help but stand there in a daze. The factory manager patted my back firmly, with a bright smile. After that, Bob's company went bankrupt. Apparently, they had been relying entirely on our company's products, which they had been procuring at extraordinary prices. So when we ended our business with them, they couldn't keep operating. Bob's father is being hounded to repay debts, so Bob is now in a state that could be called poor. Amanda was the one who told me that, thanks to the reduced losses and room to spare, our company decided to take on a new business. I was put in charge of leading that team, and since our company's products had a reputation for high quality, the new business was a huge success. As a result, our performance continued to improve, and the factory expanded. Everything was going great. Good things happened not only to the factory but to me as well. In recognition of the success of the new business, I was assured of becoming the next boss. On the day I was chosen to be the next boss, I proposed to Catherine. Catherine nodded, tears streaming down her face. Now I'm so busy with work and wedding preparations that my head is spinning. But I'm very happy. When we were deciding who to invite to the wedding, Catherine suddenly said, I want to invite your mom. My mom. When Catherine nodded solemnly, I was shaken. Even if we invite her, she won't come, definitely. That's not true. Catherine hurriedly said, sorry, for the loud voice that had slipped out. I kept it quiet, but actually, when you proposed to me, I went to see your mom, to tell her that I would be marrying you. Then your mom looked me in the eyes and said, I did terrible things to that child. I finally realized that after being apart from him, it's not something that can be forgiven even if I apologize. So please give that child all the love I couldn't give him. I remembered my mother's hunched back, the last thing I saw as I left my family home. My chest suddenly ached with pain, and tears spilled out. Can I invite your mom? This time, I nodded deeply at that question. I, who had lived restraining myself for my mother's sake, took a big fall, and I ended up going delinquent. Even so, there were people who looked straight at me for who I was. Thanks to those people, I was able to regain my true self, and now I can walk my own path in life with confidence. If I could have one wish, it would be for the people I love to also be able to walk their own paths in life.